So the question is, what happens if species with an incomplete reproductive barrier, they come into contact with one another over time? So when this happens, there's three possible outcomes of what will happen in terms of their speciation and whether or not they will stay separate from one another or they'll mingle together. So the three possible outcomes is reinforcement, fusion, and stability. So with reinforcement means that the barrier itself, keeping those two apart, is reinforced. So whether or not polyploidy is going on, habitat differentiation within that hybrid zone, or sexual selection, something is going to reinforce those two organisms or groups of organisms from mingling and becoming one species again. The other type of hybrid zone and outcome is fusion. So fusion is, over time, the two species that diverged from one another, they again start becoming similar. They start mating with one another, and their differences are over time no longer. So it's like we're back to square one. The third type is stability, and in this case, the hybrids, the offspring from this cross, they are going to still be produced. So when a hybrid is made, it doesn't diverge in separate directions. So we're still having a continual amount of hybrids, crosses between the two being produced. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure if my last slide made sense. I need to listen to it because my children were running around like maniacs. So here is a summary. Why I typed summary twice, I don't know. But this is a summary of the three different examples of outcomes of having a hybrid zone. Again, a barrier that once was is no longer, and now the species that possibly diverged are now in contact with one another. So again, just to, I guess, say it again, there's three, again, outcomes: reinforcement, fusion, and stability. So with reinforcement, the hybrids that were created are less fit for that environment, and the divergence of those two species is going to continue. That barrier is reinforced. With fusion, in this case, the hybrids are reinforced in a sense, and the two species that once were no longer exist. So again, a little bit like starting back at the beginning. With stability, hybrids are produced, but the original two species are still around in a sense. So they're still there, the hybrids are also there. It's thought that over time, possibly the hybrids will end up being more fit, and possibly the original two species may cease or no longer be around, possibly over time. Here is an example of fusion. So we have two types of fish, neither of which I can probably say their names. But looking at the picture, you can see they are different species, but they are in the same genus. So again, getting a little bit familiar with binomial nomenclature. So they're very similar to one another. So over time, there was a breakdown of the reproductive barrier. So they started sharing the same habitat. Over time, their hybrids flourished in the location that they were living. So they were no longer separate species. Now, what's not being shown in this diagram is most likely above the two that look like the parents, that the new hybrid most likely looked like the common ancestor before those two. So it would be like a flow, again, where there's divergence, and then it's like coming back to the beginning where the hybrid probably looked like the common ancestor between those two fish that are pictured at the top. So this would be an example of fusion. The genes are back to being fused into, in a sense, into one new species. One of my favorite examples is the grizzly brown bear and the polar bear. So these are two different species of bears, but they are in the same genus as one another, and they are able to reproduce and actually produce fertile offspring. The offspring is known as a growler bear or sometimes a pizzly bear. And you can see the pictures being shown. So in terms of the hybrid zone, so there is overlap of their climate, of their habitat in the Canadian Arctic. And because they are able to reproduce, what type of outcome could they have? So again, this is kind of actively taking place, these growler pizzly hybrids being created from the grizzly and the polar bear. So in terms of if I had to classify the outcome, whether it's reinforcement, fusion, or stability, at this point, I would say a little bit it's unknown. Possibly over time, this could be fusion, where the two types of species are now no longer. The grizzly is no longer around and the polar bear is no longer around, and all we're left with is the growler pizzly bear. Also, at least in terms of this moment in time, I would say it's stability at this moment, because we still have grizzly bears, we still have polar bears, and now we've got these growler pizzly bears who are still being produced because of that hybrid zone, and they're able to reproduce with one another. So in terms of these outcomes, because of the hybrid zone, it kind of depends on where in time you're looking at, whether it's reinforced and the hybrids aren't fit at all, or the two parent type species are gone, or all three are still around. So I really like this example. I did include a link, which when I upload this, I'm going to see if I can show you. It's a really silly cartoon, but it shows the divergence of grizzly and polar bears, how polar bears came to be in a really silly, like I said, cartoon. It does not mention growler or pizzly bears, but I still really like it. So hopefully I can upload it when I upload this video.
I'm hungry, Grandad. We have been walking for ages and we didn't find anything to eat.
It hasn't rained for a long, long time, Sam. Without water, plants can't grow.
But my tummy's rumbling.
Lots of animals had to walk a lot further than us to find food. I'm sure their tummies were rumbling too.
Like who?
Like the brown bears. A long, 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 long time ago, there were lots of brown bears who lived in a forest. But they had a problem. There wasn't enough food for them all.
I'm sorry, everyone. These are really hard times for us all. We'll have to split up to find food. Some of us can stay here in the forest, but some of us must go to the hot south to find food. And some of us will have to go to the cold, cold north.
I wouldn't want to go where it was very, very cold. I'd be so shivery.
That's how the brown bears felt when, after a long, long journey, they reached the edge of the forest.
Oh, I don't like it here. It's very cold. And the only food I can see are the seals way out there on the ice.
Well, I'm hungry. Let's go hunting.
Did they catch the seals?
They tried, but their Their small paws weren't used to walking on snow and ice. They slipped and slithered all over the place, and the seals were able to get away.
Oh no!
So what did they eat?
In the summer, they could eat fish, but in the winter, when the water had frozen, they had to try and get the seals.
Did they ever catch any seals?
Sometimes, but then, after a long, long time, a brown bear was born with bigger paws, with thicker pads.
I can run and not fall over!
The young brown bear's paws were perfect for walking on the snow and ice.
What's happened to the other bears?
They found it harder to survive. The bears with the bigger paws did better.
Hooray for the brown bears! But weren't they still very cold?
Not all of them. Some were born with thick fur, and they were better at coping with the freezing weather.
So could they catch lots of seals?
Not many. Their fur was still brown, and that meant the seals could still see them coming.
Oh no! Fish again!
One day a brown bear was born that had lighter fur, almost white. So when he crept up on a seal,
The seal didn't see him coming.
row! And after a long, long, long time, more and more bears were born that were white, and they could all catch seals more easily.
Delicious.
Yummier than fish any day.
And now they're called polar bears.
And do polar bears like living in the snow and ice?
They do.
And brown bears like living in the forest?
As well.
And we like living on our island.
Especially when it rains and there are lots of green plants to eat. Grandad, are there such things as green bears?